former chief executive of Wirecard, Marcus Brown, has been arrested.
Auditors revealed that nearly $2 billion has gone missing.
This has been a wild ride for Wirecard. You only need to look at the share price over the past 5 days.
Wirecard is a payment processing company. At their height, they were worth 22 billion euros.
Wirecard was supposed to be Germany's ticket into the high-tech world. They were supposed to be the pride of German fintech.
And Wirecard spectacularly imploded. Its stock went to penny stock level, and now it's worthless.
That is quite remarkable. Never before has a company on Germany's DAX just gone bust.
Is there a corporate fraud going on here, or is this something more mundane?
The business model was fraudulent right from the beginning. It was bank robbery, and investors and creditors, they're seeking more than 12 billion euros in repayments. The two key players are two Austrians, the chief executive Marcus Braun and his deputy Jan Marsalek.
Right now, Marcus Braun is in jail and he's facing charges. It's far more difficult to know anything about Jan Marsalek because he's missing.
There's reason to believe that he had close ties to secret services around the world. So he had the means and obviously the money to just vanish without a trace.
Might he be in Russia? Might he be in Asia? Might he be on some deserted island? Nobody really knows. He's on the most wanted list of Interpol, but so far, nobody's been able to track him down.
The German economy mostly builds on car makers and engineering companies, which is sort of the past. Wirecard was that bright, new, future-oriented company, and Wirecard promised that they would deliver electronic payments, and in the future they would become a super big company.
They started as a startup essentially around 2000 and grew up around the, what some people might find slightly unappetizing businesses of pornographic content and gambling, and then turned themselves into a main player in the global payment facilitation business.
Marcus, when you look at Wirecard's share price, it's eye-watering, the incredible acceleration in the valuation of your business.
I think we're showing enormous growth. I have no fear at all in terms of evaluation.
Starting in 2010, Wirecard's profits began to explode and show a very, very solid and almost too good to believe growth. Wirecard at some point replaced Germany's second largest lender, Commerzbank, and its market value of over 22 billion was more than Deutsche Bank, the biggest lender, and Commerzbank combined, which showed the significance and how things have changed in the German economy.
There's a chap called Jan Marsalek, who was the chief operating officer. There is another guy called Marcus Braun, the CEO. And while we know some elements of what led to the fall of this company, there are some elements that we didn't know about.
I met Jan Marsalek just for a background chat, and he was quite frank about his youth, that he was mostly interested in IT and programming. I can only assume he was a classical nerd when he was younger. When he rose through the ranks at Wirecard, he developed a taste for the extravagant. He lived the life of a high roller. Looking back, he spent more money than what he was earning as a Wirecard executive. Jan Marsalek was close to a commander of a Russian mercenary army who took him to the Syrian city of Palmyra right after that Russian mercenary army expelled ISIL from the city. He flew in there, he went to the beach and fired around Kalashnikovs, I was told. Even took a small piece of an ornament back to Germany. I saw it, I held it in my own hands.
Part of the Wirecard story that we've uncovered is sort of, it's a little bit sort of boys' fantasies, men in expensive suits and, fancy watches, champagne parties.
Investors are impressed, Marcus, by the growth. If you look over the past 15 years, you're up like 40,000%.
Interestingly, the collapse of Wirecard starts around the time where Wirecard is at its peak, and that is when they join the DAX index. And that's really a huge achievement to be among the 30 biggest companies of Germany.
At the height, its market value was at 22.5 billion euros.
The illegitimate part of Wirecard was in large parts business that happened far away from headquarters. So these were businesses that were in Asia or in the Middle East, businesses largely where Wirecard had no sort of operating license of its own and therefore relied on partners to work with them.
Unknown to the public and wider audience, Wirecard faked profits and transactions. How did they do this? They had a business that was called third-party providing business. They did business with outside partners that processed transactions in countries where they had no license. And these businesses provided Wirecard with fake profit statements and fake balance sheet statements. Wirecard in reality didn't turn out a profit. If you strip the profits from the fake business, which provided fake revenue and profit statements, it was unprofitable, at least since 2016. Basically, the entire company was a smokescreen.
The trouble the way Wirecard was set up is that nobody or very few people had a global overview of the company. A lot of people knew a little sliver. The auditors, Ernst & Young, for years signed off on their accounts, and so there doesn't seem to be anything untoward there. There didn't seem to be anything illegitimate. But the questions kept coming, particularly from the Financial Times that started publishing reports around 2018 saying that there were problems with accounting in Asia. At every turn, Wirecard said, no, this is not true, this is legitimate. They often would raise their forecasts as to appease investors, and they managed to wiggle out of this time and again.
Let me ask about the scandals that we've seen in the stock market.
I do not too much look into controversies.
In the Philippines, they had an account with two banks on which about $2 billion were sitting. It got from the bank fake balance sheet confirmations, and this is how the entire smokescreen worked.
There did, however, come a point around the turn of 2019-2020 where they enlisted the help of a second auditor, and that was KPMG. And KPMG was asked for a special audit of the books.
They flew down to Manila, and initially nobody doubted the money was there. They just wanted to see, can this be tapped at any time? Is this free liquidity?
What we now know is that a lot of this was fictitious, that some documents were outright forged, that some employees at these banks were not who they said they would be. Knowing now that this money never existed, that obviously posed a huge problem for Jan Marsalek, who was faced with the daunting task of coming up with several hundred millions of euros that he could transfer from Asia to Europe. As we know, that never happened, and that was sort of the beginning of the end of Wirecard as we know it.
The scandal that has been brewing over the last week is now definitely deepening.
The initial report is that no money, none of Wirecard's missing $2.1 billion, ever entered into the Philippines.
The company has temporarily suspended its outgoing COO, Jan Marsalek, but it seems there will be further questions for the business to answer.
Jan Marsalek was suspended on June 18. Marsalek went into Brown's office for one last time, and someone who happened to stumble into the room said there were intense discussions. Brown was kept talking at Marsalek. Soon thereafter, Marsalek went missing.
We're looking at a space of a week from Marsalek exiting Wirecard HQ to Wirecard going up in smoke.
More details on this to come, but again, a clearly unusual scandal.
In some ways, Jan Marsalek is sort of a mirror image of Wirecard. There is the visible, the legal part, if you want, of Jan Marsalek, which is he's the chief operating officer of a large German company. And then there is the murkier, opaque part of Jan Marsalek, which is dealing with mercenaries, traveling to Syria. There is one place where it's easy to sort of get a sense of who Wirecard and Marsalek was, and that is this opulent villa that sits in the middle of Munich. This is a place where Jan Marsalek had his residence. He didn't formally live there, but he had all the sort of fripperies that you might want.
I was granted access to the building by someone who was authorized, and I developed my own little obsession with finding out what was going on.
There's a room with some artwork, but it also has that kind of appearance now of being a place that was hastily and quickly abandoned.
Most of the furniture was removed from the place, but there was still two intense care bed units in the basement. There was a huge locker with drugs inside, uppers, downers, stimulants.
It's quite extraordinary to have 2 billion lost and not knowing where it is.
I was told that Marsalek and his gang funneled out 1.5 billion of the company.
We know he milked the company dry by transferring a lot of loans that the company provided to entities that he then secretly controlled abroad.
Investors and creditors, they're seeking more than 12 billion euros in repayments.
How can a error, a mistake, a scandal of that size happen as in a DAX corporation? We have many questions that we want to ask the government in the following weeks.
These guys, these companies have auditors, right? Is it time to audit the auditors?
The decline of Wirecard is obviously a huge embarrassment for a lot of constituencies out there. There are the auditors who signed off on these accounts for years, and the question that's out there and that remains unanswered is, why did they not detect what was going on? I mean, Ernst & Young is one of the big auditors. They should know what's going on at these companies.
This company had all kinds of signs reported by media going back a year or two now, and yet people still gave the company the benefit of the doubt over and over and over again.
How did Wirecard get so much political support? The prosecutors have for a long time turned a blind eye on Wirecard. And for the entire institution apparatus of Germany, it is very embarrassing.
Investors, first and foremost, have lost out here. And among the investors, spare a thought for Markus Braun, who was the biggest investor in the company, and he went from billionaire to now sitting in jail, so quite a downfall for him. Most people might not have too much sympathy, but if we speak of losers, he's certainly among them.
Wirecard was fraud probably right from the beginning. It's the biggest financial scandal in Germany, and the amount of money that was lost, it was probably the biggest bank robbery that happened in this country.